This is my PowerPoint presentation on Franz Kafka's A Hunger Artist. The Hunger Artist by Franz Kafka is a dark tale about a man who chooses to starve himself as a form of art. This story can be interpreted literally or parabolically. Using the latter method, it is easier to see the artist himself as a martyr who is forever being cheated of his reward. At first look, this short story seems too far-fetched to be true. Yes, the events could really happen, but only in a Hunger Games kind of way. I mean, people would have to be really nutty to be interested in spending good, hard-earned money watching people fast, right? Wrong. Hunger artistry used to be a male-dominated sport back in the late 1800s. Hunger artists weren't human skeletons, people who ate but looked like they didn't, nor were they fasting girls, young women who claimed not to need food thanks to prayer or fairies, or ascetics seeking spiritual enlightenment through deprivation. Instead, they were men almost exclusively who went without food for weeks at a time to prove it could be done, as quoted in Stop, paragraph 3. Just like in Kafka's story, people paid admission fees to see these starving artists, and there were more than a few who thought the whole thing was a hoax. Really, the historical facts are so well aligned with Kafka's story, such as the fact that one of the most historical facts by a Henry Tanner in New York City lasted 40 days, that this story could be interpreted literally as well as historically. However, I feel like taking Kafka at face value does not do this artist justice. Therefore, there has to be a hidden message behind his parable. Before one can decide if The Hunger Artist counts as a parable, one has to understand what a parable is. Oxford Language refers to parable as a simple story used to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson, as told by Jesus in the Gospels. This is the definition I am most familiar with, as I grew up in a Christian family and so read through these parables on many occasions. It was not until I was about 12, however, that I realized that these parables could not be taken at face value, and each of them had a hidden meaning. I returned to my Bible with zeal, looking for the hidden messages in Jesus' words, just like a detective. A more modern definition from Merriam-Webster refers to a parable as a usually short, fictitious story that illustrates a moral attitude or a religious principle. No longer is the term parable solely used to refer to Jesus' spiritual lessons as recorded in Scripture. Now the word has been broadened, and under its new definition, all of Aesop's fables would qualify as parables, since each fable has an underlying moral truth. In order for a hunger artist to count as a parable, there must be an underlying truth. Honestly, this is something that I have struggled with finding. Upon closer reading, however, I realized that the story could be talking about the artist's addiction to starvation. However, it could be largely applied to any kind of addiction. For example, the artist talks about the glory of fasting and blames his manager for robbing him of even greater glory should he be allowed to fast longer than 40 days. Furthermore, the artist is described as being fanatically devoted, which also sounds like addiction to me. And like all addicts, he just couldn't help himself. In fact, on his deathbed, he confesses that people should not admire him for his ability to fast. He only fasted for so long because he could not help it, because I couldn't find the food I liked. The inability to stop fasting also resulted in depression, a feeling that can be common for anyone struggling with addiction. In fact, approximately half of substance abusers also have depression, although it is unclear if one causes the other or if they simply coexist. Gang. Either way, the artist had an eating disorder and depression, which is why he lived a double life, in apparent glory, honored by the world, and in spite of that, mostly in a dark mood that became even darker. Kafka, page 716. If Kafka is indeed talking about addiction, then I believe that his parable would read something like the following. People are willing to watch you suffer from your addiction, but very rarely are they willing to come alongside you and help you to overcome your addiction and depression. It is easier to commiserate for a short while, like the spectators did, but in the end, you are alone in your troubles. The artist in Kafka's story is referred to as a pathetic martyr, page 715. I would imagine this is because he has given up something of great value, as Merriam-Webster's definition implies. After all, food is one of our most basic needs, and according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I included in the PowerPoint, it falls into the category of physiological needs, which must be met before any other needs. Of course, the artist was self-deprived of food, so he was the one withholding from himself. As such, I feel like the word martyr is misused in the context. Looking through my biblical lens on fasting, he was grossly abusing God's whole purpose of fasting as a means of devoting oneself to prayer for a short time. In fact, Jesus gives explicit instructions about the do's and don'ts of fasting. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Matthew chapter 6, verses 16 through 18, NIV. According to this, then, the hunger artist was receiving his reward. He had the people's praise, but even for him, crowd satisfaction was not enough. Inwardly, his own dissatisfaction gnawed at him. Kafka, page 714. He was fanatically devoted to his fasting, so it always upset him when his manager would not let him fast for more than 40 days, as the artist himself thought he would be able to fast forever. In this way, the artist is a martyr because he is so devoted to the cause of fasting, even to his own detriment and eventual death. Kafka's story is rich with symbolism, especially once the artist signs a contract with the circus and is placed in a cage near the animals. It is as if the managerial staff are saying that he is no better than the animals and is a sideshow, a freak, an attraction. Also, their position of his cage is demeaning in the fact that the animals are frequently being fed, and the serving of raw meat to the beasts of prey and the roars at feeding time constantly offended and depressed him. Page 718. In this, one can see that the circus placed no value on the sanctity of human life and considered their employees to be of no more value than their animals. In fact, their animals were treated better, as seen by the way they treated the panther, who later replaces the artist in his cage. Once the artist makes his deathbed confession, he fasted out of necessity because he could never find food that he liked. He is replaced by a panther in his cage. This panther is everything the artist was not. While the hunger artist was depressed, melancholy, skinny, and unmoving, the panther was lively, beautiful, and noisy, for the joy of life streamed with such ardent passion from his throat. Kafka 7:19. Additionally, zoo-goers take an interest in the panther that they never took in the artist, and he draws crowds of onlookers. He is also doted on by the managerial staff, who are sure that the food he liked was brought to him by his keepers without hesitation. Page 719. Kafka's story, A Hunger Artist, and his other short story, The Metamorphosis, both follow common themes. The main character is cheated of his reward by the people around him. For the hunger artist, the reward he wanted was to see how many days he could fast. His manager always cut off the fast after 40 days, while the artist wanted to see how long he could endure. Of course, the circus allowed him to test his resolve. However, he still never knew how great his feat was, for they stopped changing the count outside of his cage after the first couple of weeks. This way, no one, not even the hunger artist himself, knew how great his achievement was. Page 718. Gregor Samsa, in Kafka's other story, The Metamorphosis, is also cheated out of his reward. First, he is a good traveling salesman who is not appreciated by his family, despite the fact that he supports all of them. When he turns into a gigantic insect, the family is appalled by him, and only his sister takes care of him, although as menially as possible. Samsa is torn between his human conscience and his insect drive. He is never fully able to succumb to either, and is therefore cheated of any value his life could have. He is so concerned about neither scaring nor grossing out his family that he lives out the rest of his life confined under the sofa in his room. Both of Kafka's stories have a dark edge to them, and it takes the reader several times to even begin to understand these fantastical stories, which are more parables than fiction.